A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 73. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
What's up?
Hey, man.
Well, we started this conversation before we started our conversation, so I think I kind of wanted, even though we've got a lot to talk about, I still kind of want to jump on this because it's about
our
toys.
Pre-show material was so good, we made it part of the show.
I know, it's like that would be our Patreon only part of the show.
That's right. You get access to pre-show material.
That's what they do, man. That's what they do. Anyway,
here, John, talk about what tea he's drinking this week.
Yeah, boy, hot damn. So we had started this conversation. I wanted to get it on tape, so to speak, because we're kind of in this weird position here of grown adults and, talking about something that one of the aspects is toys.
Yeah.
And I think we have a
Figures.
I call them toys.
Figures.
Dollies, as the girls like to call them. But no, it's just, you were saying before that you've been enticed a little bit by these Black Series figures, and now it's kind of making you kind of wonder.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, so this stems back to, I guess, was it Comic-Con, where they showed sort of the next upcoming Black Series figures, and Chirrut and Baze were part of that group, and whatever the next group coming out is going to be. And at the time I was like, oh, that Chirrut figure looks really good. I hadn't seen Rogue One yet, but I was like, I'll bet I'm going to like that character a lot. I like Donnie Yen. Indeed, I did like him in the movie. So they still haven't been released, the Chirrut and Baze Black Series figures, but they're starting to show up on sites as, you can pre-order them now. We know when they're going to be released. So I was like, oh, that Chirrut figure looks good. It's maybe a little more than I can justify to myself to spend on a figure, but I'll keep an eye on it. And a couple of years from now, who knows? And so from there, I was like, well, a couple of years ago, I bought a couple of Lando figures just because I love Lando so much. And now I'm like, well, maybe should I add to that? Should I get some, Empire Strikes Back bounty hunters? Not any of the like big fancy ones, but your Zuckuss, your 4-LOM or your 4-LOM. I don't know what the correct
I'm a 4-LOM
pronunciation.
I'm a 4-LOM guy.
4-LOM.
But I'm also, I don't care. People can do whatever. I'm agnostic on this stuff.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know, so I was looking it up and, we'll get it because I don't want to pay too much, right? Because I think I've talked about, or I know I've talked about the Force Awakens character, or the infamous
Constable Zuvio,
who I'm like, I kind of want one now just because it's like it became such a thing of like this character who seemed like such a big part of the push, and then he's barely in the movie. I was like, that would be kind of funny to get. I don't want to pay more than like, I don't know, $6 or $7, but
right.
it'd be kind of. I'm not gonna pay $10 for this thing, but it'd be kind of fun to like have it, and people go, well, I don't even know who this is, and then you get to like say, well,
you Keep it mint in box now.
Yeah.
Well, it's so funny that you mentioned Constable Zuvio, because you had mentioned this before, I think. I don't know if it was on the show or before, but a couple months ago. And I was like, I had one I was going to have sent to you, but like in the interim, you went on vacation, and I didn't want it I didn't want it sitting on your porch and getting stolen. So I didn't order it, and then when I went to order it, it had gone up to like $20 again, and I'm like, no, you're not getting it.
Yeah, a new Star Wars movie came out, and suddenly demand for Constable Zuvio skyrocketed.
It was down to $5 with Prime shipping one time, and I was like, but I didn't want to buy it and keep it around, because I've already done a little speculating myself, which is really terrible.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess these things with the Black Series 6-inch figures that I had this whole thing where I was trying to get find the Lando one from Comic-Con, and it doesn't come out until like next month or something like that. And they announced this in the summer, so I don't know. I don't understand thing. Anyway,
So then I was looking at like, well, how much would it be to get an IG-88 or a Forlom, and what are the good versions of them? I don't want one of those crappy ones where he looks like the Incredible Hulk. I want a decent one for the price. But then looking up reviews and then at a certain point, I was like, why am I spending so much time looking at this? Do I really need a Forlom figure in my life? And it would basically just sit on a shelf in my office. Like, what do I get from having this? And I don't know. I started weakening a little bit, and now I'm back to like, I don't know that I really need one. But I don't know. What do you? Well, you've been doing more of this lately yourself.
So I have this cautionary tale of what happens when you go out and look for stuff, because I've been kind of following some collecting podcasts, and just to kind of, because we don't do a lot of collecting here, so I kind of like to hear different kinds of Star Wars talk. So now I've gone from being like, I'm not only going to buy like one or two Black Series, to being like, now I haven't gone crazy, but I have been doing this goofy thing where I've been speculating about like getting stuff for a good deal and buying extra ones in case I need trading stock, which is always a bad sign. Like there was this, everyone was talking that they did a Darth Revan, which for people who aren't in the know, Darth Revan is like one of the old Republic, like the 2,000 years before the common Star Wars era. It's like there's games and books and comics. I guess they did comics based to the KOTOR, the Knights of the Old Republic. So that one I'd heard was selling for $50 on eBay, because it was hard to come across. So somebody had said, like, check your GameStops, and there's a GameStop by my house. And I went in, and sure enough, there was one. So I bought it. And I didn't really want it. But then I was like, at first I walked out and said, dude, don't buy something just for that. And then I went back and I bought it. And then I was down in my mom's house in Aberdeen, and Walmart. I was in a Walmart, which is basically the social hub of Aberdeen now. And I went down the clearance aisle, and they had stacks and stacks of these Scarif Shore Troopers for like $15. And it's like, I know they sell for like 20, but it's like, how many? I'm like, well, I'll get one. Well, maybe I should get another one. So now I've got like that. And then I went to another place, and they had like, some Star Wars, like a serving tray that looks like the Millennium Falcon for like cheap. And I bought that. And then I bought a place setting that has like lightsaber forks and knives. And I didn't buy those to use. I bought those if we ever have another contest on this show, if somebody would actually enter, we would have like maybe prizes or something. I don't know. I'm squirreling it away for a rainy day, so to speak. So I will give you this, a cautionary tale of it. It can start out very innocently, and then all of a sudden you've got two shore troopers, and you're like, I have to. Which one should I take out of the box?
Yeah.
So yeah, be wary. And even with like my original thing that I was like, I'm only collecting the original vintage Kenner figures, and then I spent some money. Like, this is months ago. I was at thrift store, and somebody had them in baggies, and it was like there was like two good. They were like baggies of 5, and I'm like, well, I only like 2 of the ones in that bag, and I only like 1 in that one. But I just thought, oh, I'll just buy them all, and I ended up with like 2 Greedos, and I'm like, oh, good, I'll sell one of the Greedos. And then I look, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, this one looks a little different. Then I find out, oh, this Greedo was made in like Spain, whereas all the other ones or it was made for the Spanish toy company that did the thing. So it's got like missing country of origin. And I realize, oh my God, there's people that collect just variants. And so I'm like, well, maybe I should keep this. And so now it's like I don't even have the ones I can sell to like pay for the ones I bought. So I've had to kind of like slow my roll, so to speak, because it gets crazy. You go and say like, oh, this won't take up my entire office. Yeah, it quickly will. But that being said,
selling Greedo sounds like a good name for like a Star Wars toy collecting documentary or something. Exactly.
Selling Greedo. But yeah, no, it's like we're at this point where we're just gonna, we'll pivot to this in a second, that as much as Rogue One was a lot of fun and the build up was fun, even though I would say that I had more anxiety building up to this than I would say excitement, but it turned out to be for the best. But now like all the Rogue One stuff is starting to like get on markdown, and it's like that $300 act that was like you can control with your phone was down to $89 at my Target, and I did not buy it. I resisted the urge. I have no room for that kind of stuff in my house, and that also kept me out of buying one of those. Have you seen these things where they're like the 4-foot tall First Order stormtroopers?
No,
it's like they're literally like plastically molded. They come in different sizes, but there's one that's like a good 4.5 feet tall, and it comes with a Darth Vader, and I'm like, oh, that might be fun, and like, where am I going to put this? So I had to turn that down. It's like $100 thing, and they had it for $30.
You could have, instead of a garden gnome, you could have a First Order stormtrooper just watching over your shrubs.
Oh, see, now you say that, and I completely should have done that. Probably would just the neighbor probably just would have like looked at me and like, what is that? Is
this the activated light and sound battle buddy that I'm seeing?
Yeah,
here?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. It's the battle.
That might. I don't know if that's good for outdoor use, but
we're
they show this next to a child. It's like the size of a child.
It is. It's the size of a child. I saw a guy, actually, speaking of that, I saw a guy on Reddit that he bought one of them on Closeout, and he dismantled it and cut out all the thing and made it into a stormtrooper uniform for his son.
Oh, that's not too bad, I guess.
So I guess my point is that you just kind of there's a lot of temptation out there to buy Star Wars stuff right now, and it's probably if you're a person that tries to keep a Spartan life, you might want to avoid it. But that was Rogue One. Now we are in the new era, aka Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. It's been obviously it's been announced. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody thought my Barry Gordy's The Last Jedi joke was very funny on Twitter. I was like, I've made, so for people that don't know,
I appreciate it.
There's this movie out there that from the 80s, and it's like it's Barry Gordy from Motown produced it, and it's got like Vanity and a bunch of character actors, and it's kind of like
Keisha Knight Pullum.
Keisha Knight Pullum's in that?
According to Wikipedia,
she must have been a baby when she was in.
I mean, it stars Keisha Knight Pullum, but I can't imagine she has like a huge role.
Yeah, and it's about a character. It's a guy named
Chaz Palminteri is Hood number 2.
Yeah, it's
William H. Macy is JJ.
I've not seen this movie in a while, so it could totally be in it. The only thing I remember is that it was one guy's named Bruce Leroy, and he's sitting. He's an African American gentleman, and he's wearing a very, now they would call it cultural appropriation, an outfit with the bamboo hat and eating popcorn with chopsticks because he's obsessed with Bruce Lee. And this guy is like he's in anyway. It's I was kind of surprised. Like even my wife hadn't seen them. She's like, I've never heard of this movie, and it's What is that song? The Beat of the Rhythm of the Night. Who did that one?
That's a good question.
Anyway, it's that song, that the DeBarge family. That song, which is a famous 80s song, is actually from that movie. So that's anyway. So it is The Last Jedi. They've released, we've seen the official logo, which is in red, and we've even seen the very, well, not the very first shot. We've seen the what it's going to look like in the opening crawl of episode 8, because Ryan Johnson let that slip on Instagram in a couple days. So I guess hemming and hawing and debarging aside, what's your take?
I think it's fine. It fits with the kind of naming convention that they've established over 7 other movies. The bit about Ryan Johnson showing the start of the crawl that I thought was interesting. I mean, first I thought it was interesting that the logo was in red. Instead of the traditional, I don't know what you'd call that, gold, I guess.
Yeah.
And it we've been hearing that Ryan Johnson is kind of taking it in some different directions, and it really does seem like there's this quasi experimental feeling at Lucasfilm right now, where okay, well, this is how this is what we think a Star Wars movie is supposed to be. Why don't we change that a little bit? What if we don't have an opening crawl at all in these standalone movies? What if the logo is red? What if the logo is green? What if, we do these other things? But so I thought that was interesting. But I also wondered that photo that Ryan Johnson put on his Twitter, or I don't know if it was an Instagram or whatever, one of those things. I think it was in black and white, right? And
yeah.
So, but you could see, episode 8, The Last Jedi, in lettering pretty clearly, and it looked like it would still be that lighter colored gold to me, because I feel like if it was that same red color that they used just for the logo, if you decolorize that, if you switch that to black and white, it's going to look a lot darker, and it would have looked a lot darker in that black and white photo if it was still red, basically, is my point. And so I don't know if they're just making the crawl and then they'll turn it red, or if the red is only for the logo, but then in the opening crawl it's still going to be the same as it always has been. Not sure. So, The Last Jedi, there was like immediate speculation and people answering that speculation, right? Is Jedi singular or plural? Someone pointed out that the opening crawl for The Force Awakens explicitly refers to Luke Skywalker as the Last Jedi. So it's, likely a reference to that. I'm not, if that is what it is, and Luke Skywalker is the Last Jedi, I'm not totally surprised. In part because, ever since they switched over to Disney and created this story group and started basically building this, or rebuilding, I guess, this, universe, this galaxy, one of the ideas that's been kind of coming up repeatedly is this idea that, well, just because someone uses the Force doesn't mean that they're a Jedi, right? Or just because someone uses the dark side of the Force, that doesn't mean they're a Sith, right? Kylo Ren's not a Sith. Snoke isn't a Sith.
Right.
They still use the dark side, but that not every dark side user is a Sith. Not every light side user is a Jedi. Those are just two specific religious sects, I guess you would call them. But there's nothing about using the Force, believing in the Force, that says you have to be a Jedi, right? And that is something that they've been pretty consistently developing over the last several years. And so, just because Luke Skywalker might be the Last Jedi doesn't necessarily mean that, Rey is going to be a Sith, or
he's going to die.
She's going to follow her. I mean, for character arc purposes, she might have her troubles, right? But people are like, oh, well, that means that Rey is going to kill Luke Skywalker. Like, that is absolutely not what that means. I mean, maybe that is what happens, but just the fact that the movie is called The Last Jedi does not mean that. So I think people are starting to kind of see these implications that just don't necessarily follow. But, I think it just points to this idea that they are going to maybe move away from a Jedi-centric galaxy, right? Someone on Twitter yesterday was talking about how, maybe this is a sign that, with these standalone movies and all these other things, that eventually they're going to move away from a Skywalker-centric, story, universe, what have you. But even beyond that, I think it seems like they're moving away from the Jedi and Sith being like the only conflict or the only, important ideological, religious, mythological conflict there, that they're trying to open things up and make it even broader than just Jedi and Sith. And so, I think that, it's a bland title, but I mean, that's fine. Many of the other titles are bland too. The Force Awakens isn't like the most interesting title. A New Hope is fine, but you could say, well, maybe that one's a little ambiguous because and open to interpretation, whereas something like The Last Jedi is less open to interpretation, but like The Empire Strikes Back is not open to any interpretation whatsoever, right? That's okay, this is what happens in this movie. So overall, I think it's fine. And I think some people are excited about the title, not excited about the title. To me, it just doesn't seem like something that lends itself to like really getting worked up over.
Yeah, I would always say that every release of a Star Wars title for a movie has kind of, it's. And at first, my first blush was, oh yeah, that's really bland. That's really bland, and it's not. But then again, the litmus test is kind of like, does the title does it cause the consumer, the person to ask more questions than to have the questions answered? And, in that way, it's completely successful. It's, a lot of this kind of, like the Phantom Menace, when that was announced, people were kind of going ape shit about it. And it was just like, wow, what does this mean? We're really going to have this dark, edgy kind of, Star Wars movie with like, nobody knows who to trust and all this stuff. And of course it turned out to be a pretty minor, a minor amount of intrigue and a pretty child focused type film. And then Attack of the Clones, it's like, this is where we find out where the Mandalorians and the stormtroopers come from and da 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 da. And it all becomes like, the final revelation of these things become more banal, at least for stormtroopers, but then literally the clones do attack. It's, Empire Strikes Back, literally. And it's a very performative kind of like, there's revenge, there's returns, there's awakenings. And I would say that as far as, tapping into that, the old school serial thing, I don't know if Last Jedi kind of has that, I don't even know what the term would be, this kind of almost janky kind of syntax, or because I would say Attack of the Clones probably has the most, like, you're just like, wow, that's kind of a weird way of naming your movie, but whatever. But yeah, when you start to talk about like, well, is Jedi singular, is it plural, which I didn't even realize until, and I'm embarrassed to even admit that Josh Gad taught me something today. Mm-hmm. I was watching this video that's going around because I guess he's doing a movie with Daisy Ridley, and he asks her to come to his trailer, and she's obviously wearing a robe and her hair's up, and he starts just bugging her about it it's obviously put on, but it was right. Like, oh yeah, I guess Jedi could mean that there's only two of them. And then it's like, we're going to probably get in, if we have time, we'll probably get into this, that, Rebels, there's Jedis on Rebels. What happens to them? Or are they really Jedi? Because like none of them have actually gone through the, is that the death knell for Kanan and Ezra? Or is that just another thing like John's saying about, the evolution of the Star Wars mythos, where that like, hey, maybe this binary, Jedi Sith thing is getting just tiresome, so maybe we can branch out more. And you can kind of see that they're already, again, I don't want to jump ahead, but there's stuff in this week's Rebels that would actually kind of fall within that. We're looking at the Dr. Aphra comic, and it's kind of like an existing, the concerns are not Jedi Sith concerns, even if it's a story set during the Galactic Civil War or whatever. So right. It is that kind of thing where it's one of the things that they, Star Wars as a franchise has relied heavily on since 1999. Is this heavy Jedi thing, the lightsabers, the kyber crystals, the spiritualism, and they probably at some point are going to have to back off on it, because it's just going to be like, well, how many different ways can we tell the story? It's like either one side is going to have the advantage on the other, and then they're going to have to fight. It'll become almost like, maybe they want to avoid it to be like, when a Rocky movie, when Rocky movies, like the first couple of them are fantastic, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, Rocky's going to get his butt kicked, and then he's going to go punch meat in Russia until he, drags sleds around, and then he's going to beat the Russian. And then the next thing, it's like he's on the outs, and then he learns a lesson, and then he comes back. So yeah, maybe they want to avoid that. Maybe they've got, maybe we're giving them too much credit. Maybe they're just like, it's just a title.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because to take your last point, right? I mean, even at the end of the Dark Horse era, they had those. Was it called Legends? Or I don't think it was called. It was Legacy.
The Cade Skywalker stuff.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, I think it was Legacy. 2 volumes. One of them was longer than the other, because the second one, I think they announced that. Disney had bought Lucasfilm, and that the comics were going to switch back to Marvel, like in the middle of the volume 2 legacy run. But those are all about the Jedi and the Sith, and the rule of 2. But then this one Jedi wants to create something called the One Sith, where like you can have hundreds of Sith, and they're all Sith, and it's the one Sith, but then you go back to like the rule of 2, right? Basically, they kind of, this rule of 2 thing, basically George Lucas wrote them into a corner, with saying like, well, there can only ever be 2 Sith, right? There's the master and the apprentice, and he kind of wrote, this wasn't necessarily his intention at the time, but he kind of wrote them into a corner with, how many bad guys they can have running around. So I think to work around that, they've started building out this idea that, well, this Sith is just one possible dark side sect, and because then otherwise you just go back and forth of like rule of 2, the one Sith, like we don't agree with the rule of 2, we do agree with the rule of 2, and then you get like infighting within the Sith, and that is about should we be 2 or should we be 1 or hundreds or whatever, and that is maybe less interesting over time as you write more and more of these stories. That's less interesting than, well, what if you have the Sith versus a different dark side sect, or you have different this we'll talk about with Aphra, like the Ordu is Spectu, and they're fighting. Are they good or bad? Are they fighting against the Jedi? Or are they whatever? So yeah, I think it's just a way to kind of make their jobs easier as well, like you say, whereas they don't just have to keep rehashing the same ideas over and over again, but like decades in the future or centuries in the past. It's like, oh, really? This is the same thing for centuries? Okay.
Right, yeah, and that's the thing. You don't want to, and of course, the rule of 2 is kind of I think emerged from, they retconned it or something back into those older books, which I'll be honest, I've never actually sat down and read them. Although I keep like, they don't number them, so I'm like, I keep buying them at half price and going, oh, this is like the 3rd one. Never mind, I put it down. So I kind of want to eventually read those, because I think most of them are Drew Kapierson or whatever his name is. But yeah, it's they toyed with this over the years in the mythology, because they've always been kind of, when ancillary material outside the movies, they've always been kind of locked, and they would do things like, Dark Jedi. Even ironically, the Last Jedi, which I think I retweeted this on our Twitter page, it was actually the name of one of the old original Marvel ones between I think it was between Empire and Jedi, and it had to do with a guy that had been he'd been a Jedi Knight, or he'd actually, something had hit him in the head, and he kind of lost his mind, and we don't know if he was actually real or not. So I mean, they would always kind of like somebody could have a light. They didn't want to have it be like every person with a lightsaber is a Jedi, and then we have to deal with the Force, and then it's like, well, we're Lucasfilm tells us we can only go this far when we explain it. So I know that they've always been kind of, whether it's Dark Jedi or Knights of Ren, these kind of ways that people that use the Force, they want to step out of that binary thing, which was kind of the prequels domain and the Clone Wars. And like I said, I feel like Rebels is moving away from that too. I feel like they don't want to, I think they're doing that so they can they don't necessarily have to paint themselves in a corner that ends with Ezra and Kanan dying at the end of the Rebels run, which we don't even know where that's going to be. I mean, right.
Kanan, of course, is the last Padawan from the comics, but I don't know if he considers himself a Jedi. I guess he does after that, little encounter with Yoda's spirit or whatever. But I don't know if Ezra considers himself a Jedi or a Padawan, right? He's been carving out his own path, and Kanan's been kind of fine with him carving out his own path. And even in this most recent episode, Ezra refers to himself as, I use the Force. He doesn't say, I'm a Jedi, or, I'm a Padawan, whatever. He doesn't use that terminology. He just says he uses the Force. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that also helps them maybe, potentially work around those lines of dialogue from A New Hope, where Tarkin is talking to Vader, and the Jedi have been exterminated, and you're the last remnant of that ancient
of that
order,
old religion.
Yeah.
I think
so that's a way for them to maybe say all the Jedi have died out, but there are these other Force users who just are different, and so they can still be around, and that line of dialogue is still technically true. But then I feel like you're getting into this kind of legalistic splitting hairs, that it's technically you're right now, but George probably meant this other thing, and now you're just working around that.
That's not what I meant at all.
Yeah.
It's just, and I like the fact that somehow it can it almost denotes kind of this multi-generational story that they're kind of building now, when it's, grandfathers and fathers and children, and spread over many trilogies. They can, every generation has its terminology. It's like they don't necessarily want to be defined by their people have come before them. It's, so maybe the Jedi, it's like, well, the Jedi failed, the Jedi had hubris, the Jedi were manipulated. So why would we want to just fall right back into their philosophical problems? It's like that whole thing where the idea that they talked about, I always think it's like the, sorry about the phones ringing in the background. I can't reach it, but
I can't even hear it.
Oh, so sorry, listeners. Anyway, just this idea, the EU, the Jedi, Luke could have a girlfriend, he had a wife, and then he had a child, and that kind of, but then all of a sudden, after that's all been established, then George dumps all that with his new trilogy, and the idea that they're almost like monks, and it's even in the ancillary material of the books with the like, this Jedi on the council is the only Jedi allowed to have a wife because his race is so endangered and that kind of stuff. And it's like, he took great pains to try to like, remove the fact that these people could have families. And now it's kind of like, and like I said, they all got backed into these weird narrative corners because it's like George almost has this issue where it's like when he was creating this stuff, I don't know if he was being malicious, but it was like he was closing off things to kind of make it less apt for people to be less apt to play. Whereas I feel like early on, it was kind of like the Wild West and you could do whatever and nobody was there he would just say, don't do the Clone Wars and don't do origin stories for characters from the movies because that's our job. But everything else is fine. But it's, like I said, like you said, it's fine. It's, I wasn't wowed with it. It feels in tone, at least in choices, very simple and kind of probably Disney doesn't want to ruffle feathers and say, like have it be something like the rise of so-and-so and,
right.
It does. I will say one thing. It's very, it does show that they're trying to maybe, I don't know, break the ring theory a little bit in the title because I wouldn't say The Last Jedi matches up with Attack of the Clones or Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, where it's always about action.
Yeah. Well, the ring theory was that's a George Lucas thing. I don't think anyone at Disney or anyone at Lucasfilm really feels like they have to adhere to that. Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Yeah,
they just do that 3 movie outline that George wanted to do.
Right. So, I guess what did
I mean, none of the titles previously have ever like referred to a specific character or anything like that. So to expect suddenly like, oh, there's no mention of Snoke or, oh, there's nothing about, the Resistance or whatever. It's like, yeah, well, that's not really how these things go.
Yeah, the rumor was that it was going to be called The Fall of the Resistance. As kind of like, and I think that was just wishful thinking.
The Empire Strikes Back or whatever.
Yeah, I think somebody just, and that's the thing about, we've, even after 25 years of the internet, we've gotten no better at controlling rumor control. It's the same kind of stuff that you would hear on playgrounds in the 80s. Oh, they're going to call the last Star Wars movie, the Jedi Return of, blah, blah, blah. And well, they weren't even sure what they were naming that movie. They kept changing the name of it.
Right.
And the only other big news about, well, I mean, I guess Mark Hamill was interviewing. They were in the middle of interviewing Mark Hamill, and he had. Yeah,
the AP was talking to Mark Hamill about something else, some other movie or TV show he was working on, and they said, "Oh, they just announced the title." And Mark Hamill, I guess, he was like, "Oh yeah, Ryan told me the title back when we were filming." And he was like, it's fine. He basically said what we've said is like, yeah, none of these things are very descriptive, but, I think it fits within the series that I hope our fans enjoy the movie, basically was what he said. He was like, please do not let the title dissuade you from seeing the movie.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I've never heard anybody come out of one of these Star Wars movies and go, what a piece of crap.
Everything was great, but that title was, yeah.
Even Rogue One. I mean, like I said, I've never been a huge fan of the name Rogue One, but it didn't once affect me in my enjoyment in the movie. It's like, yeah, this is all well and great, but they really should have called it like Band of Rebels or something.
Yeah.
There was another piece of news that I feel like is kind of non-news, but not fake news, but non-news. But
yeah,
Woody Harrelson was at
people are talking
Sundance, and somebody came up to him from Cinema Blend maybe and said, "Hey, congratulations on the Star Wars movie." He's like, "Yeah, thanks." He's like, "Are you playing Garris Shrike?" And he basically goes, "Yeah, whatever."
He was like, "What's the name?" And he goes, "Garris." And like before they even finished saying the name the second time, he's like, "Yeah."
It's like, yeah. I do not think that that's who he's playing.
No, I don't either. And Pablo Hidalgo got on Twitter and said, this is kind of like when, what's his name? Lawrence Kasdan was, when they were doing press for The Force Awakens, and someone asked him the name of some, Sith Lord from the books, and he had no idea who that was. Right. And Pablo Hidalgo was like, these people don't know the names of everyone, right? They don't know that. It's basically saying, no, that's not who the character is. And he just said, yeah, because he doesn't know, right? At this point, I mean, who knows at this point if the name of that character has even been set in stone.
Right, yeah.
I mean, if he just knows, like, you are playing Han Solo's mentor. And he's like, great.
Wasn't Cassian's name, like, very different? Like, there'd been a rumor coming around that he was going to be playing a different name. And I think later on it was even kind of revealed in one of the books that was like, oh, that's one of his pseudonyms or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember what it was, because when they were speculating about, oh, he's Biggs, he's playing Biggs. And they said, no, he's blah, blah, blah. And, oh, gosh, I forget the name. But anyway, I mean, I shouldn't laugh, because although the way it was done, it kind of at a party, probably press event or something, and it's like, people are probably drinking, having fun, and this guy just runs up and asks a question. He's like, turns over, and it's like, he's probably got half of, he's got potato skins in his mouth or something. Well, no, he's like, oh no, I think Woody's like, he's into macrobiotic foods or something.
Yeah.
But he's eating what's that, Stitcherella?
Hemp seeds.
Yeah, hemp seeds. He's smoking some hemp seeds. He's eating some hemp seeds. And he probably just threw it off. And like Garris Shrike, for people who don't know, that was and I'm not, you've read the AC Crispin solo trilogy.
This is not the Brian Daley, like 1970s Han Solo trilogy. This is the AC Crispin, like 1990s, maybe.
Yeah, I would say that's about something.
Well, it would have to be, right? Because it was post. Yeah, so like 97, 98, late 90s. AC Crispin Han Solo trilogy, where this is like Han Solo's origin story plus just some crazy not even that crazy adventures, just some adventures. And she gave him this like Dickensian childhood where he was like adopted by this guy Garris Shrike, who is like a con man and a grifter, and so he like adopted this kid Han Solo and basically used him as like, he was like a pickpocket and all this other stuff, and there were like other like, it was basically this kind of like Oliver Twist Fagin relationship, a little, Artful Dodger, that's what it is. Kind of relationship. And it just like, and then there was like this Wookiee who was the cook on the ship, and she was like a mother figure for Han Solo. Like, I don't know, it just, that part of the trilogy never really worked for me. Like, it just felt like something else entirely. Like, this doesn't feel right for this character, and it doesn't feel right for like a Star Wars thing to just be like, oh yeah, he's this guy adopts a bunch of orphans, and one of them's Han Solo, and he just like a pickpocket and stuff, and then later on, I guess he somehow makes it into the Imperial Academy, etc., etc. Like,
it's never been that trilogy has never really kind of. I've never been able to. Every time I've started it, I've kind of just said. It's
also the quality of the writing isn't great, which didn't help. But it's that like, it's still that like very Dickensian. It's Shrike is like, you seem like a smart lad. Are you smart? Yes, Captain, I'm smart. Good, that's the lad. I could use a smart lad to what is this? So I am perfectly happy for Woody Harrelson to be playing someone other than Garris Shrike, and I'm sure no matter who he ends up playing, the Save the EU types will pop out of the woodwork and be like, oh, this still doesn't directly contradict the AC Crispin trilogy, so Garris Shrike is still around,
Right, and the other thing I would say, and I shouldn't be laughing at people that necessarily jumped on this story, because year and a half ago, Mads Mikkelsen signed a poster or something as, Galen or something, and people were like, what does that mean? And so we knew, like, a year and a half ago that he was playing somebody named Galen, and it turned out to be true. So not that, but the way it was all revealed to me is like, yeah, it's like that word never came out of Woody Harrelson's mouth. Right. And like I said, he's probably doesn't even know the name of the guy he's playing. I was reading this anecdote or something, and it's like, somebody's talking about that new movie with the M. Night Shyamalan movie where it's like he's playing a multiple personalities or something, and he was like, he got it, and he's like, how he read it, it's like, oh, which character am I playing? It's like that kind of idea. I don't think actors, when they're offered a job, they necessarily like care what the name of anything is. They're like, well, how big of a part is it? How am I? What am I getting paid? Do I have to wear a wig? Like he did in the what he had to do in those Hunger Games movies.
Right.
I kind of hoping we just see his. I hope he gets to go au naturel. But
yeah, I don't know. Who knows?
Who knows?
I can't imagine he would sign up to like get in some kind of Trekkian alien forehead makeup. Right. So yeah, he's probably either going to be as he is with maybe like some stubble, or I guess they can give him a wig. Maybe he'll just wear a series of elaborate hats like the prequels. Because this will be closer to the prequel area. Maybe he'll just wear a series of like.
He'll just wear that little hat. Did you ever see that movie? Now You See Me.
No,
it's terrible. It's terrible. It's like this movie where
there are like 2 or 3 of those.
Yeah,
movies,
there's 2,
there?
and they're awful. And he's got like a little fedora in it, and it's just like. That'd be so awful. He wears a black suit and a fedora in the whole movie and a blaster. Yeah, they're terrible. I definitely don't recommend Now You See Me as evening's entertainment. But yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I'm excited about. I'm not any more excited, but I'm definitely not like unexcited about Woody jumping in on this movie, because, like I said, the Han Solo movie is the great unknown for me. It's like, oof. You're taking an icon, you're taking an iconic character, and you're pinning him down. And I don't know. It's like, look what happened with Darth Vader, an iconic villain, and even in the hands of the maestro, he botched the landing 3 times, kind of, and getting a truly, amazing story about the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker. So, I feel like a broken record complaining. It's like, it's definitely the balls in the Lord Miller court, so to speak, about making this something special. And I really hope to be proved wrong. But speaking of other people's,
I mean, I say that if they made him Doc from that Brian Daley trilogy, I'd be like, yeah, that could be interesting, or at least a Doc type character where he's more of like, he's an outlaw tech, right? He's a mechanic who works on these smuggler ships, and I feel like he had that mentor. He had another mentor, I think, that showed up in that trilogy where. He met up with a smuggler he used to work with who had kind of gotten out of the game, and his wife was like, "Oh, you're still smuggling, aren't you? And don't tell him, because that would make him want to get back at." So I feel like they've given him a series of mentors throughout his young life, his young smuggling career, and so there's probably plenty of room to give him another one.
Yeah, at first I thought, oh, maybe they're just trying to capitalize on the kind of the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade prologue. Right. But then I realized, I mean, the Daily books predate that by 15 years. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, obviously it makes sense that a character like this would have, he might not start off the way we see, obviously see him in, I don't know. It always makes me like wonder. It's like, oh, they're going to reframe these characters and I mean, I guess that's my always my concern is whenever they expand these characters, they're always going to fundamentally kind of change them take all the fun out of the guesswork. And when they finally pin down an origin, you're going to be like, that's what you pinned it down to. It's like he was working he was working as a mechanic somewhere and a blaster. Mm-hmm. He found a blaster in somebody's trunk and he stole it. And it's like, oh, that's how he got his blaster. But anyway,
yeah.
Then there was you were talking about there was a blurb for the new Timothy Zahn.
Yeah. So that's coming out in a few months. I think that comes out in April.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so the Del Rey, the good people at Del Rey Books put out their, blurb or synopsis or whatever you call it, that they put out to help sell the book and everything. So it says it contains minor spoilers, but it doesn't really. I guess you learn the names of some of the other characters in the book, but I can read it real quickly here. So it says, after Thrawn is rescued from exile by Imperial soldiers, his deadly ingenuity and keen tactical abilities swiftly capture the attention of Emperor Palpatine. And just as quickly, Thrawn proves to be as indispensable to the Empire as he is ambitious, as devoted as its most loyal servant Darth Vader, and a brilliant warrior never to be underestimated. On missions to rout smugglers, snare spies, and defeat pirates, he triumphs time and time again, even as his renegade methods infuriate superiors while inspiring ever greater admiration from the Empire. As one promotion follows another in his rapid ascension to greater power, he schools his trusted aide, Ensign Eli Vanto, in the arts of combat and leadership, and the secrets of claiming victory. But even though Thrawn dominates the battlefield, he has much to learn in the arena of politics, where ruthless administrator Arinda Price holds the power to be a potent ally or a brutal enemy. All these lessons will be put to the ultimate test when Thrawn rises to Admiral, and must pit all the knowledge, instincts, and battle forces at his command against an insurgent uprising that threatens not only innocent lives, but also the Empire's grip on the galaxy, and his own carefully laid plans for future ascendancy. So that is Thrawn. Arinda Price is Governor Price from Rebels, she's the well, I don't know if you would get this reference, but she's the Franny Fisher looking one with the kind of, I don't know, is that a bob haircut or shortcut hair that kind of curls around her ears? That's Governor Price from Rebels. I don't think we have met Eli Vanto anywhere. I think it's interesting that his protege is an ensign and not like anyone higher ranked. But he's not an admiral yet, so maybe there aren't too many other folks under him. I'll read it. It sounds like it's good. It does not contradict, or at least I don't think this time period will necessarily contradict any of the other times that we've seen Thrawn in the EU. Either the Thrawn trilogy or that Outbound Flight stuff, which is where kind of they first encounter the Chiss and Thrawn in his kind of native lands, his native planets. So this is kind of filling in that gap and kind of a prelude to where we see him in Rebels, I assume. Or I guess maybe even earlier than that, because I think by the time we get to Rebels, he is a Grand Admiral, but in this, I guess he just gets up to Admiral. It strikes me as sounding a little bit like the Tarkin novel where... we know who's going to win at the end, right? Thrawn will be victorious, but ultimately we know it's sowing the seeds of rebellion, and the rebellion ultimately defeats the Empire. So it's, I guess it sounds like it'll be a little more insight into Thrawn's personal philosophy, how and why he kind of developed his preferred tactics and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if this will be a lot of like military strategy and, battle positioning of forces that, military sci-fi folks and people who like military history and those kinds of things enjoy. But it sounds like it could be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, Zahn, I should say, I think he's good. He has these particular kind of tics in his writing that he kind of reuses a lot. And so if you read a lot of Timothy Zahn at once, it can kind of get a little repetitive. But
he says how often has he said, and it all went straight to hell? Right.
Or point. Right. So two people are talking and one says this and one goes, yeah, but what about this? And then the other person goes, point. So
yeah, it makes me...
but I haven't read any Timothy Zahn in a while, so this will be kind of refreshing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think of it?
I'm interested, but yeah, it kind of has that kind of like, it makes me wonder. It's like, is this going to be another one of these kind of dry, Machiavellian kind of crossed with military conquest kind of stories, like where it's kind of technically it's actually a big story, but because of that kind of stuff, it's like sometimes action gets, put on by the wayside because it's a lot of, people talking in hallways and,
right. You experience the action from like a distance, right? You see it from Thrawn's perspective where he's just like positioning these ships, as opposed to like the X-Wing novels where like you're there in the cockpit with the pilots and it's, dogfighting and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, how far removed from like the excitement are we going to be here?
Yeah, it's kind of funny too, because it also makes me realize it's like, well, do I really do I care about the origin? But people have been clamoring for this for decades, so it's not really my place to be like, oh, we don't need this, because definitely people want to hear it. But how much of a characterization is Zahn going to be comfortable, moving away from, I haven't seen anything that has come out in Rebels or anything to make me think like, oh, this version of the character is a fundamentally different version than from his original books. It's kind of like, how much excitement are we going to have if you're already kind of familiar with the character? It's kind of like, oh, he's always going to be, are we going to learn how he was able to, like stuff in Heir to the Empire, or like he could tell, oh, I saw a long range scan of a ship and they were docked just long enough for 3 people to travel from one ship to the other. And you'd be like, I mean, that was always one of the annoying things, that like he just seemed to be way too, knowledgeable about this stuff. But maybe this will kind of go in the way of saying like, well, it wasn't always like that, and this is how he learned to, right, trust his instincts or trust his data or whatever. I'm definitely interested. I definitely probably, I probably will just buy it and take a chance on it. It comes out the 11th of April.
Yeah. This is deeper than anyone expected this conversation to go, at least of all me. And I have no idea like whether Timothy Zahn is even aware of some of this stuff and whether this will inform his book. But, a lot of work on cognitive science, or at least kind of early-ish work on cognitive science and decision-making by people, some of the studies were on chess masters, right? And how do chess masters kind of do their thing, right? How do they know, or how do they calculate what moves to make and all of that sort of thing? How do they become chess masters, essentially? And it's basically pattern recognition, right? That they study these moves from history and situations, and it just becomes like, okay, if this person moves their piece here, then my response is this, right? Or like, right, I have one of 2 possible responses. And it cuts down on how much kind of cognitive processing you have to do, right? That way you don't have to spend a lot of time like calculating every possible next series of moves that your opponent can make, right? Rather than do that, you just study all of these possible you study all these previous moves and what happened to them, and then it's pattern recognition, right? And so, I wonder, if Thrawn is his brilliant strategist, and if this book is about him kind of developing that, or how much of that came from his experience before he got to the Empire, and how much of that are we going to see here, where maybe there will be echoes of that Thrawn trilogy, and some of these things like, oh well, the reason he was able to say, well, that's just about enough time for 3 people to move from one airlock to the other, is because that happened to him before, and right, he didn't recognize it then, but he recognized it later on, and so I wonder how many echoes of that trilogy we're going to get in this book. Of how much of this is him learning about all of what his strategy is, and him developing this strategy, versus okay, this is already his fully formed philosophy that he is just implementing and like teaching those around him how he thinks and getting them to think the way that he does.
Yeah, I mean, I think the former, I guess the former would probably be the more interesting. The idea that he would start the book at a disadvantage and learn. It's like the idea, and speaking to that, the pattern recognition, I think that would be interesting. I mean, again, it's like we're starting to find out that as infinite as the human mind is, it's like there is a certain aspect that we tend to work in patterns because it's just easier. We don't wake up every morning, start fresh. So it's like, well, the people that are really good at this, they are really good at noticing that people tend to, shorthand a lot of stuff in life just for ease. And in some ways that's kind of an interesting way of doing it, because I would think that maybe on some level they would have him do all this, and then at some point they would just imply, well, maybe he has a little bit of the Force with him or something, because that's the always way, they shorthand, actual skill and just go, yeah, well, maybe they're a little Force sensitive. They've even said that, like, oh, Han Solo could be Force sensitive because of how he's such a great pilot, and it's they completely supernaturalize any kind of hacking of people that can kind of hack the way human brains work to their advantage. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would agree. I would think it would be much more interesting to have him start out and learn how he achieved these skills. But it depends on what kind. From what the blurb says, it's kind of like there might be some teaching going on, but it looks like, I don't know, maybe again, it doesn't discount your view as maybe that when he teaches this ensign Eli Vanta, which is kind of strange. Why is he teaching? But I guess we'll find out in the book. And in some ways he will recall how he came to these things. So maybe,
yeah. And honestly, I have a feeling that we're not going to get that, right? We're going to get this kind of fully formed philosophy, but I do think seeing, because we haven't really seen Thrawn fail a whole lot, except in the trilogy at the very end, when it was like, oh yeah, that's why you don't trust an insane clone, because they're insane and they're not predictable, and they might not go along with your plan, right? That was really his mistake. But in terms of, tactically, his victories, even what seemed like defeats for him were, gave him more information and so fed the larger victories, etc. We haven't really seen him stumble a whole lot as a character, as a tactician. And so I think that would be interesting. I don't know if that is what Timothy Zahn thinks would be interesting, and how he views that character. So, because I think that is also, the character that's coming to mind right now is, Ray Sloan, but also, what's her name? She was the Imperial defector in Aftermath, right?
I didn't read. I don't remember.
She had been the protege of that, Imperial efficiency expert.
I don't really remember that book very well, unfortunately. I thought you were talking about Admiral
I'm sorry, not Aftermath.
I thought you were talking about Admiral Dalla.
No, Twilight Company.
Oh, I haven't read that. Sorry.
Yeah, so there's this character from A New Dawn, who was like the Count it'll come to me. Count Vidian. There we go. And by it'll come to me, I mean Google will finally load while I'm talking. So it was Count Vidian, right? And he was this kind of efficiency expert hired by, right? He was a consultant hired by the Emperor to streamline imperial production and figure out ways of basically getting resources cheaply and all of that. And so one of his proteges ends up defecting to the rebellion in Twilight Company. And it's kind of interesting because, right, she's like, look, this is what I did. I was his protege. This is what I learned from him, and here's how it's working, and here's how I'm going to use it against the Empire, right? And so you could kind of see this evolution of this character and taking what she learned and applying it, and then maybe that worked, maybe it didn't. And you know, I think one of the things that Twilight Company did a good job of was showing, like, okay, these people don't always succeed in their plans. Let's show them, like, trying to now come up with a plan B and how they do that. And so, you know, I don't know. I kind of hope we get to see Thrawn do a little bit of that, just because that would be a different story to tell with him.
Right.
But I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Again, I don't.
He's like, you guys have put way more thought into this book than I have.
Well, yeah, I don't know if that's like if Timothy Zahn thinks that would be interesting for his character, or if he's like, nope, this guy is a brilliant tactician, and so we're just going to show that.
Exactly. So we should probably move on to our next thing. So what do you want to do? You want to do some comics, or do you want to do Rebels?
Yeah, let's do comics.
Okay.
So speaking of A New Dawn, which was written by John Jackson Miller. John Jackson Miller is also like a comic book historian and data guy. He has a website called Comichron where he compiles and posts all the data on comic book sales basically every month, and, you know, going back decades. So just recently, a couple of weeks ago, he posted the data for December 2016. And so we are going to be reading some of the comics that were part of that, or we're going to talk about them today. And so I thought it'd be interesting to go over this just to kind of take stock of where Star Wars comics are right now. So what he finds is that, right, so there are two different ways of parsing the data. One is dollar amounts, and then one is units, right? Because obviously some comics, if they charge $3.99 versus like $2.99, one of them you can get more money out of it even if you're selling the same number of units, right? So first, just looking at he looks at kind of growth in the comics industry, and he's not just looking at Star Wars comics, I should say, right? He's looking at the entire industry. There was like 7% growth in 2015, and then compared to 2014, and then just barely like 0.3% growth from 2015 to 2016. And what he says is basically, you know, in 2015, you had this kind of reboot, this new era of Star Wars comics at Marvel, the, you know, new promotional push, everything. So without that, basically without what he says, or the tens of millions of dollars that were added in 2015 and to a slightly lesser extent 2016 by Star Wars comics, then actually you would be looking at 2015 as this kind of slowdown year in comic sales, at 1% growth compared to 2014, and then 2016, like there probably wouldn't have been any growth at all. So, I mean, in some sense, the Star Wars comics are kind of keeping the industry afloat a little bit, or they're making sure that there is continued growth in terms of dollars, right? Not necessarily in terms of units sold, but dollar amounts. But units sold helps too, which I thought was kind of interesting because we've kind of touched on this in a past episode. It's been a while where we looked at some of his data again, but I mean, my sense is that, you know, the issue number ones of these new series, like they do pretty well. Some of the big event things do well, like Vader Down did pretty well. Other than that, we're talking like top 20, top 30, top 50 in sales per month for the Star Wars titles, which to me, that I would think like, wow, they probably want them to do better than that. But at the same time, right, there are hundreds and hundreds of comic titles issued every month. So, even top 50, it's like, yeah, you're doing pretty well. Like, you're in the top, 20% of, every comic issued in a month, if you are like number 50 in sales or something. So with that said, so for December 2016, and now talking by unit sales, not by dollar amount, but by unit sales, Star Wars 26, which we're going to talk about in a minute, Star Wars 26, which is the first issue that starts this new Yoda story arc. That was the number 7 selling comic by units in the month of December. Dr. Aphra number 1 was the number 8 selling comic by units, and then Aphra number 2 was 25. If you look at graphic novels and trade paperbacks, the first volume of the collected issues of Poe Dameron was the number 7 graphic novel. And then I was curious about the Han Solo miniseries because I hadn't looked at these prior. And so if you go back by month, Han Solo issue number 1 was the number 4 selling comic book that month. And then the rankings go. So it goes 4, 26, 39, 36, 29. So, that first issue did very well. And then after that, there was pretty much a trail off of how many people were buying it, which is interesting to me in part because, it is a really good comic and it was getting really good reviews. There are all these blog posts about people saying like, oh, you should be reading the Han Solo comic. And, even blogs that are not Star Wars centric, I would see things show up in Google News and things about like, oh, here are some comics you should be reading right now. And it would be like Spider-Woman and Han Solo. And, it would be included with, lists of kind of comics you should be reading generally. But, so I don't know if that is a matter of, people don't buy comics that much anymore, or, they only want to buy like the physical copy, or like they really care about that issue number 1, but then beyond that, like, yeah, I'll just like download this online and read it that way. I don't know what's going on there, but I will say I myself purchased a copy of the trade paperback just because it is a really good comic, and I was like, yeah, I'll have a hard copy of it, sure, to go with my hard copy of the Lando trade paperback. I figure I'll put those two crazy cats together. So. So anyway, so that was just kind of what I noticed with the comics data, but I don't know if there was anything you noticed or wanted to comment on.
Yeah, I definitely could follow what you're talking about, but I don't really know the data like you do. It is interesting. It makes me wonder if it's, people buy first issues because they're speculating on value down the road, or if they're just interested in trying something, and then maybe, the thing about my, and I've said this many times before, is that really my window of being into comics is like, it's starting to push to like 30 years ago kind of situation. So I was very into it for about 3 years, where I was buying every issue. It was like, half of my money from my job would go to buying comics. And so I burned out really quick because I started getting in, at this point I was a teenager and I was starting to like, want things other than comic books. But it makes me wonder if like how many people are really apt to go out every month to buy a comic versus like people that are okay with just dumping $4 into a virtual comic situation where they're like, or they go, hey, for $69.99, which is I hear a lot of people do, is like you pay for the Marvel Unlimited, and if you're willing to wait 6 months, you can have everything for one price. I mean, it wouldn't work with us because I really don't want to wait 6 months to talk about stuff. But it's economically speaking, it's kind of, makes sense. I will say that, I can't exactly, when I talk about the top sellers, and I'm looking at this one with Justice League versus Suicide Squad is number 1, and All-Star Batman is 10. It's like, it just goes to show you how basically all this, DC is really, up the way up on the thing, and you know, except for, you know, time honored people like your X-Men and, you know, the well, I guess they did another Civil War series. It's like Star Wars is basically, and Hulk, of course, I mean, he's a stalwart, but the idea that, you know, a lot of these comics that I hear, it's just, they're just not selling. And
I should have noted too that December, I guess, was it December or was it, you know, at a certain point late last year, DC did their own reboot. It's called Rebirth. And so that's why you're seeing, you know, Batman number 12 and you know, All-Star Batman number 5 and you know, of course, the Suicide Squad movie meant that they, you know, started making more like Suicide Squad and Harley Quinn comics and everything. But DC did their own kind of reboot, and so that kind of created a lot of interest for some of those titles. And, you know, so now there's like a new Wonder Woman number 1 and a new Batman number 1 and a new Superman number, you know, and as you said, you know, people are kind of drawn to those low numbers, especially issue number 1s, because, you know, they think they might have value later on or just out of habit or whatever. And I mean, I think that has affected certainly Marvel, I would say. I know less about DC, but, you know, the way a lot of these things are working, right, where you're not getting up to, you know, Hulk number 118 anymore. You know, they'll do a Hulk storyline or maybe a couple of Hulk storylines for a couple of years, and then, you know, a year and a half after it starts or 2 years after it starts, they kind of reboot it and say, oh, there's a new Hulk, or there's a new Thor, or it's a different Thor title. And so that gives them a chance to put out, you know, a Thor number 1, even if it's, you know, the Fantastic Thor or the Mighty Thor or the Unworthy Thor or whatever it is. It gives them a chance to put out a Thor number 1 like every other year, which, right, those sell better. And so you don't get the like development over time of like that. Oh yeah, see issue number 247. It's like, oh yeah, see this other Thor version 2 or, you know, issue 2. So yeah, it's that just seems to be where the industry is. And I should say my comics reading mine goes back like a couple of years,
right? And I mean,
rather than a couple of decades. But my sense is from reading things and kind of seeing what's out there and available, that seems to be where the industry is these days.
Yeah, I mean, it really seems that the industry, especially Marvel, from at least things that I've read, is that it's kind of in flux because they're dealing with an aging reader base, but you know, comics are for kids. And I mean, I don't mean that disparagingly, but, you know, it always makes me think about a great book about comic books, at least on the Marvel side. It was like the Secret History of Marvel Comics. And they talked a lot about this about these kind of, this is almost kind of like the way it was in the 70s, is the fact that, you know, they had people that had been reading, like, I forget what era is golden and silver, and I'm sorry that I don't remember it, but it was like, you know, the 70s, it seemed like almost like there was like these two kind of like, there was a lot of people that responding to things in the culture that were changing, a lot of like, you know, stuff like Black Panther and Ms. Marvel. And then there was also kind of mixed in with that, there was the people that had been they'd come out of the 60s, you know, kind of, they were the potheads, they were dropping acid, and they were doing like more stuff like the Silver Surfer. And they were, you know, in some ways it was like this perfect way of like kind of transitioning from, you know, this kind of stead, kind of Jack Kirby-esque, you know, moralism of the week kind of thing, and they wanted to get into more real stuff. Well, I feel like comics is kind of in that but they're kind of in that nexus right now where they want to talk about more stuff that's in the culture. They want to have, you know, people want to address social issues, and then there's a aging reader base that are just like, I just want superheroes fighting, and I want a long story. And I feel like that's kind of why these sales are probably, you know, I think it's just kind of a changeover of their reader base. It's like, you know,
yeah, and they may not even know what model is going to work, right? And so they're just trying a bunch of things.
Yeah, I mean, they've been doing stuff like, you know, bringing in people, like 10 years ago, they would bring in like a Joss Whedon and stuff because, oh, he's real popular. But now it's like, that's not really enough anymore. It's, they want different. So people that maybe haven't even done comics, like I think the writer Roxane Gay is doing a comic for Marvel now, and she actually has never written a comic before. So it's kind of like they're willing to take some pretty big, I wouldn't even call it a risk. I would just more of a chance on maybe trying to rejuvenate the sales. But yeah, it does feel like it's the old guard of characters in Star Wars that are just kind of supporting this right now as they kind of figure out where they're going in the future.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's
I do
I'm seeing.
I think it's encouraging that. No, what was that? Sorry.
Yeah, I said that's just what I'm seeing from what I'm reading.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's probably encouraging for Star Wars, for the Lucasfilm folks, that you have Dr. Aphra, who originated in the comics, right? She's not a character that people know, like a Leia or a Lando or a Chewbacca or something, right? She's not a character that people are going to recognize and say like, oh, they made a comic book of this person, I want to read it, right? She's an original character, original to the comics, and the fact that her first issue made top 10 for the month, right? Number 8 again out of like 300 something. This essentially unknown character. That's probably pretty. They're probably encouraged by that.
Yeah, and the truth is all this speculating and numbers. It's like you also can't discount the fact that it's a good comic. You know what I mean? It's like at the end of the day, we can talk like, oh, we're addressing social societal change, or we're making sure we're staying true to our character. It's like that. None of that matters if it's not a good comic. And I feel like Aphra is probably right now at first I was like, I don't know if this is for me, and I still don't, but I'm still enjoying it a lot more than I am Poe Dameron. But anyway.
Yeah, and I think now that Han Solo's run has ended, right, Aphra is probably the best Star Wars comic out there right now.
Right.
Between the three of them, this one and Star Wars and Poe Dameron, I think it's already kind of established itself as like, this is probably the best one going right now.
Agreed. So
So with that, do you want to start talking about Aphra, or do you want to start talking about Star Wars 26?
What are you more excited about?
I'm more excited about Aphra. Probably.
Let's do Aphra. I mean, the Star Wars 26 is a kind of a flashback story, and to be perfectly honest, it didn't really. I'm not crapping on it. It's just
okay.
It didn't stick with me.
Star Wars 27 came out the day that we were recording this, so we haven't read it yet. But yeah, maybe we'll give it another couple issues and then talk about the story line more broadly. So Aphra. So since we talked about the Aphra comic, issues 2 and 3 have been released. And so to recap, right, Dr. Aphra, of course, is this archaeologist type. She's droid archaeologist, at least. Sure, that's how she's introduced in the Darth Vader comic, but it sounds like she might be kind of an archaeologist more generally. She has now left the employ or left the partnership with Darth Vader, hoping that Darth Vader thinks that she's dead, so she's trying to lay low a little bit.
But not really.
And in the first issue, we got some backstory on kind of her and how she got her degree by less than professional means. Basically, she stole her advisor's idea or findings, or she like faked it or something to get back at her advisor, who is this kind of misogynistic old cretin. Right. So basically, as to prove a point to her advisor, she made up this discovery. And so the very end of issue 1, we find out that her license has been suspended because the Archaeological Association found out that she had faked that discovery, and that discovery was how she got her degree, right, and her license. So in issue number 2, we find out that it was Aphra's father who kind of leaked information that discovery had been falsified or not entirely real, and so he did that basically to kind of get her attention, I guess, and to get her help finding the Ordu Aspectu, which was his lifelong obsession. And we find out in issues 2 and 3 that basically he was obsessed with this this group of people and finding evidence of them and all this, that he basically ignored his wife, and his wife left him, and he has a rocky relationship with his daughter because she obviously followed him into the archaeological field, but she resents kind of the fact that this thing took over his life and wrecked his marriage and his family. So who are the Ordo Aspectu? Well, that kind of depends on who you're asking. If you're asking Dr. Aphra's father, the Aspectu, well, so what's not in dispute were that the Ordo Aspectu, I think, could use the Force, and maybe they had lightsabers, maybe not. But in the father's version, the Ordo Aspectu were interested in finding immortality, and the Jedi attacked them, and the Jedi were the bad guys in this scenario. In Dr. Aphra's version, the Ordo Aspectu were the bad guys because they were looking for immortality, and to do that, they captured a bunch of Jedi Padawans and were like holding them captive, and were going to do a bunch of tests on them. And so the Jedi were really just trying to rescue their Padawans who've been captured by these bad guys, the Ordo Aspectu. So some disputes about their historical legacy, their relationship to the Jedi. Again, I think we talked about this, but this idea that they're building out this galaxy and this history of like, oh yeah, the Jedi, the Sith weren't their only foes in certain things, right? They had other people that they were dealing with. So the Aphra's father has coordinates for where to start looking, and it turns out that it's Yavin 4, right? And because this is an issue 2, it's at the very end of issue 2, they show up on Yavin 4, and because this is post events of the Darth Vader comic, which means we're still in the timeline between the events of A New Hope and the events of The Empire Strikes Back. So this is post Battle of Yavin, and the rebels have abandoned that base. The Empire came in, took over, so the Empire is crawling all over Yavin 4 now. They are accompanied by Black Chrysanthemum, which is the evil Wookiee who is a bounty hunter and is now just hanging. I guess he's hanging out with Aphra because she still owes him money,
something like that.
And so he's like protecting her to make sure that she can pay back her debt. And the evil droids, 000 and BT. So they're on Yavin 4. Black Chrysanthemum creates a distraction basically by beating up all of these Imperial scout troopers who, hear noises and hear about this disturbance. Basically, he creates a distraction so that the droids and Aphra and her father can infiltrate one of the Massassi temples. They do. And there's like a clue or a map or something that's going to tell them the location or some more information about the Ordo Aspectu, because apparently they and the Massassi had some kind of relationship, or one was like the ancient version of the other or something like that. And so issue 3 is a lot more kind of building out, giving more detail and on the relationship between Aphra and her father, and seeing them in action, crawling through this temple and looking for clues and looking for the light that shines on the thing and reveals the map of whatever. So it's pretty dialogue heavy. There's not a ton of action, but it's character building. It's developing these characters and giving them some depth and dimension and talking and providing more backstory to their relationship and why the mother's not in the picture and all that. So the issue 2, notable for a few reasons. We get the word or the phrase torture tease, right? So the evil droids, they just want to kill humans and they like torturing humans. And there's something like, oh, don't be such a torture tease, which is a little, I kind of cringed when I read that.
Yeah.
The word twee makes an appearance in issue number 2. They're not like listening to Belle and Sebastian or anything, but the word twee shows up. So the word twee is now in the Star Wars galaxy. In issue 2, we hear that, where we find out that Aphra's nickname, her father's nickname for her, is Little Boop. And then in issue 3, we hear her full real name, which is Shelley, or Chelly, Chelli, Shelley Lona, or Lana Aphra. So we have her name, we have a nickname now. Again, giving some more backstory, some more dimension to this character. So it sounds like you said you're still not sure it's for you, but it sounds like you're coming around on it. These 2 issues are maybe not the most like action packed. It's a lot of Aphra arguing with her father and, like I said, crawling around this temple. But I do think it's an interesting direction to take this, and I am interested to see what happens next. So is that kind of where you are?
That's absolutely where I'm at, because I just feel like, then I kind of go. It's like I have this issue thing where I'll read it once and I'll go like, yeah, I didn't really like that, and then I go, well, I need to read it again, and I'm like, there's some things here that are kind of unique. One, there's very few parental relationships in Star Wars, that you get to explore. Like, nobody has parents that they ever see in Star Wars. It's like Ezra's, Luke has an aunt and an uncle. He doesn't know who his dad is. Princess Leia, we never know who anything is. So it's kind of interesting, even though it is an adversarial relationship. But I mean, as far as the way they've kind of explained it, Aphra's probably in her mid-20s. So she's not really at the point where she needs parenting.
Right.
She's kind of starting to form who she is. And it is kind of it's a real interesting when they bring her father back into it. And it's kind of like, well, what is an adult? How does an adult reassess their relationship with their parent after, having kind of a tumultuous or even a huge gap in even seeing each other? So it's kind of like it's what do they call it? It's her kind of her disdain for her father is pretty appropriate, because especially since her father seems to be very flaky on some level. At least maybe it's just the way they kind of characterize. He doesn't seem particularly tough to me. He seems like she's going to be kind of saving his behind as time goes on. Yeah.
I mean, this comic is, I don't know if that's the pitch, but it's how it's been characterized as, Aphra is this kind of Indiana Jones type character. And comic is these 2 people, these 2 archaeologists, like looking for this ancient civilization. And so you do get this a little bit of the, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade dynamic. I think Aphra is probably younger here than Indiana Jones is in that movie. But yeah, that's still kind of like, yeah, your father, you haven't seen them in a while. Things, you have kind of this rocky relationship, and they still are calling you by your childhood nickname that you kind of resent now that you're an adult. So yeah, there's a little bit of that dynamic, which is like, people enjoyed that movie. It was a fun movie,
Right.
It works in comic book form. I do. And you're right. It is interesting. We don't get a lot of that parent-child relationship. We don't get to see it a lot, right? We even in, Leia and Bail Organa, I don't think we've really seen a lot of. There were a couple of flashbacks, I think, in the Leia comic, but that was, she was a young girl in those, and trying to think of what else it would even be. I guess Jango Fett and Boba Fett.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but I mean, technically, that's not even his. Well, I don't. I mean, I get it, but he's a clone.
Close enough, I guess.
Yeah, I guess he is. He raised him as a son.
The only, I mean, and I guess there's a little tiny bit of it in Catalyst with Jyn Erso and her parents, but she's so young in that book that it doesn't really register that as a parent-child thing. And the only thing too, it's like, all right, it's always daddy issues, right? It's never. It's like, well, why couldn't it be her mother that's the archaeologist, or why is it always the father here? That is the issue. And yeah, that's kind of the convention that Lucas established, but they're moving away from these other conventions. So why aren't they moving away from the one where it's always daddy issues?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing I have about that. I was like, well, there's no real reason it had to be her father, at least not that we've seen yet. So that's my only thing. But yeah, I think it's, now that they've kind of established this relationship and they've given it some more context, I'm hopeful that the next couple of issues we get a little more action. We get a little more, at this point I'm interested to learn more about the Ordo Aspectu and the Massassi and how Yavin 4 plays into this. And, because I think in the EU it was, this ancient race that were the precursor to the Jedi. And, it was very much tied into this Jedi story because that's all we knew at that point. And so for the people writing in the EU, all they had to go off of was the Jedi and the Sith. So they just made everything the Jedi. And now that they're kind of moving away from that, giving Yavin 4 a little more depth and building out that universe and that history of kind of these different sects and these different factions of Force users in the galaxy. I am kind of interested to learn more about that too through this comic, which I don't know how much they'll get into that versus leave that for something else and make this comic, more about the kind of present day relationship between Aphra and her father. But I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, it's interesting that they've decided to, now they can openly insert Rogue One references. So there's a reference where her father didn't believe, he believed the official story that Jeddah was a mining accident, the destruction of Jeddah, and that the Death Star was a myth, and that Alderaan, I forget what the excuse for why Alderaan. And I was thinking, it's like, this is kind of, and unfortunately because of the way the timeline is, this is post A New Hope, that this comic probably means we won't see, like, say, Aphra run into, Jyn Erso or something, because it kind of seems like they both kind of operate in these they operate in the kind of the sinew of the Star Wars galaxy, kind of like, we don't know exactly, Aphra is not on the up and up, and I get the feeling that because of where we see Jyn at the beginning of the movie, she wasn't always on the up and up. She was stealing stuff. It's like, maybe they shared a cell together at some point, but
at this point Jyn is dead, but there could be a flashback, and they've mentioned Sana a few times. Sana Staros, is that her name? Right. So and in the Rebel jail storyline from the Star Wars comic, we know that she and Aphra had a backstory, and it sounds like Sana kind of helped put Aphra in contact with the person who helped her kind of fabricate that, her dissertation, basically. Right. So we could see Sana again, and maybe they're, Sana and Jyn know each other. Maybe, you could see Jyn in her post-Saw Gerrera pre-Rogue One life, just kind of going from place to place, trying to get by, and destruction of property and whatever else. She could definitely operate in that sphere where she would have come across someone like Aphra or someone like Sana or Aphra's dad or one of these other folks.
They should almost you could almost unfortunately you couldn't have Jyn in this again, but the idea of a Star Wars All-Stars kind of comic where it's all these characters that are products of the comics. It's like you could have Sana and Aphra and BT and Black Kyrgyzstan or whatever is Karistan. Just kind of almost like a West Coast Avengers kind of idea of these are like the B team, but they're going to get it. They'd have an opportunity. They're kind of
they're kind of more fun.
They're kind of already there. I will say that, but I just kind of, hopefully they'll maybe sprinkle. But then again, this idea, she's still, Aphra's using her real name, and she's supposedly supposed to be dead. How long before Vader finds out? She's supposed to be
laying low, yet
everybody
knows.
And
I guess that supplies some of the tension of them being on Yavin 4, of I hope they don't get caught, because the Empire is supposed to think that she's dead, but they seem to be able to sneak past everyone easily enough that it never really feels very tense.
Yeah, and did you see that line where, what is this? I keep forgetting, what's the name of the C-3PO droid?
That's 000.
000, where he talks to the torture droid. It's like, I'm a big fan of your work.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of stuff, like, I call them minor, the kind of a groaner, but I feel like if they were they could bring in a lot of, they could have Boba Fett show up, or something, make it, they could run afoul of bounty hunters. It's,
or the bounty hunter from the Lando comic, the bounty hunter that used to date Lobot. She could show up,
right.
Because in the Darth Vader comic, that's how Black Chrysanthemum got involved, as Aphra went to a bunch of bounty hunters, and I don't think Boba Fett was with them, but he might have been like mentioned or something. I know Boba Fett was in the Vader comic, I think, because for when Darth Vader went back to Tatooine and to Jabba's palace, I think Boba Fett was there. So yeah, he's definitely running around some of these same circles, with Black Chrysanthemum. Maybe they contact some of his bounty hunter, comrades and go from there. Yeah, there are a lot of different directions they could take this, and a lot of different ways they could weave other characters into it. So-and-so has a cameo, in the Marvel, like, superhero comics, they'll do that, where it's like, here's this Black Widow series, but then Iron Man has a cameo in this issue, and then the next issue the Hulk shows up, right? They could start doing that with this, where it's like, the storyline's going on, and then Sana shows up and helps out for a little bit, and then Boba Fett shows up for a little bit.
And the fact that she's an archaeologist and she's on the wrong side of the law, like, I mean, I think it's a perfect thing for her to kind of be the nexus to interact with, like, a lot of interesting characters, and maybe even dig some characters out of mothballs, like Jackson the rabbit or whatever, which I think they might have killed off in a comic. I think there was a joke where somebody pointed to the skeleton of a rabbit and said something that, he's gone or something, which that's an old Marvel guy that, that back when Jabba the Hutt looked like a walrus or whatever. But yeah, no, I like I said, this thing is, I would say at the end of the day, I recommend Aphra. I would say that it's a little bit more in the potential of a great story than it actually being a great story. But
but it definitely feels like they're getting there.
I'm definitely feeling like this might be what takes over. Because like I said, I've always had, every one of these comics, I've had ups. Anything that runs for more than 5 issues, I've had a problem with at some point. But it's closest to, in spirit, of some of the best, some of the most interesting and fun parts of the Darth Vader comic, and I really hope that they kind of keep the kind of maybe the levity and the kind of almost the Forrest Gump thing, or not necessarily Forrest Gump, where he's influencing history, but more of the idea of, or that they are witnessing history, and they're kind of in the, they try that with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., that TV show, and I never got into it. Of course, people have said it's improved greatly. I'm just not into it. And I'm kind of thinking like, this could almost occupy that kind of stuff, where it has its own stuff in the margins of Star Wars, where it doesn't have to affect the main story, but it's still compelling. Do we want to try to do Rebels before we close out?
Yeah, I think so. Well, you tell me. Do you want to do it, or
yeah? Please. Sorry.
Okay. So the most recent episode of Rebels, I'm not sure what episode number it is, because there's that 2-parter, and I don't know if they counted the 2 parts as separate episode numbers or if it was the same. So this is Trials of the Darksaber. So this is the start of a multi-episode Sabine Mandalorian arc. Although the show is the next episode isn't going to air for like 2 or 3 weeks, I think.
Oh, really?
So
I didn't know that.
So I don't know how their production schedule got this way, but so from the first few episodes of the season, or that first episode of the season, where last time Maul showed up, right? Maul has this like cave where he lives on Dathomir. They fought him. They kind of drove him off. He went off in search of Obi-Wan Kenobi, basically, and they found the Darksaber in his cave. And the Darksaber was it's Mandalorian lightsaber, basically. Whoever wields it, basically controls House Vizsla on Mandalore, and thereby essentially controls Mandalore. Darth Maul had it for a little bit. Now the Rebel folks have it, and since Sabine is the Mandalorian, she has it. But we find out in this episode she's been reluctant to train with it or even talk about it. Basically, she gave it to Kanan for safekeeping and hasn't mentioned it since. Fen Rao talks to Kanan about it, and then everyone basically convinces her to start training with it because, as soon as people find out that she has it, they're going to come after her and they're going to challenge her, and so she needs to be ready for that. Ezra is kind of the only one who is skeptical or doesn't think it's going to work. And there's some interesting dialogue there and some good performances too. I think a little bit of like jealousy on Ezra's part that, Kanan had been his teacher and, well, I don't think, Sabine's not going to be able to do it because I can use the Force and she can't. And, she's going to have a hard time. We also get some more backstory on the history of the Darksaber. It was built by Tar Vizsla, who was Mandalorian, but he joined the Jedi Order. It became a symbol of leadership for House Vizsla. Whoever wielded it, they led House Vizsla, and all of the other clans respected that. And so if Sabine does learn how to use it, she could get House Vizsla behind her, unite Mandalore basically to fight against the Empire. So she starts training with it very reluctantly. Kanan is somewhat reluctant to train her. He doesn't think she's ready. He thinks she's blocking and kind of fighting herself more than she's really devoted to this. Ezra is competitive and is, being a little snide about like, oh, you need to do a little better than that if you want to fight against me. So Kanan talks to Hera. Hera convinces him to kind of accelerate her training and is telling Kanan, like, look, you are not letting her really engage with this. You're saying that she doesn't really want to train, and so you're letting her keep blocking this stuff. And so you need to let her really fully engage with this. And so he does. He lets her train with the Darksaber and kind of teaches her a little more about fighting with a lightsaber and what it means and how it's an extension of your body, all that stuff. And in so doing, Sabine kind of opens up emotionally. And we find out that, what we knew is that, she had been in an Imperial Academy and left to join the rebellion. What we find out is that, she basically realized that she was building these weapons for the Empire and training to use these weapons for the Empire. They were basically being used to keep Mandalore in line and to enslave Mandalore to the Empire and all that kind of stuff. And so she spoke out against it, but her family did not stand with her. And they kind of, from their point of view, they thought she ran away, but basically they pushed her away. And so her rebel family basically pledges to be with her. You get, this very striking scene at the end with, Fen Rao and Kanan and Ezra kind of kneeling before her saying, we'll follow you. And that's the episode. There's no B story to this episode. What happened was that the Warhead episode that previously aired was originally the B story for this episode, but Filoni convinced them like, no, we need to make an episode that's just about Sabine, just about this training. Make this episode about the training process and about her and really dig into this character and her relationships and her backstory. And so that's basically what the episode is. So there's some nice bits too about Kanan and because Kanan has only ever trained Ezra. And so, he sort of knows how to train Ezra, or he's kind of negotiated this way of training Ezra that sort of works, but he never really learned how to train anyone else. And so, there's a little bit of him having to learn how to be a good teacher and train Sabine and train someone who's not a Jedi and who doesn't use the Force. And so that was interesting too. And then the bit about, the history of the Darksaber and how that came about, that's at the very beginning of the episode. And it's this neat 2D animation sequence that honestly, I feel like I mean, it feels like it came out of, a recent animated movie, in terms of the quality, but also just the style of it, right? It's essentially shadows playing on a wall that form these shapes of, Tar Vizsla and the Mandalorians and the Jedi and all this stuff. And but it was a really neat sequence and very different from the look of the show. And I thought it was really cool. So like I said, I think the next episode, at least Sabine and Ezra show up on Mandalore, or they show up where these other Mandalorians are. And so over the next couple episodes, right, she'll have this Darksaber. She'll start, I think, trying to reach out to her family, her biological family on Mandalore. But we'll have to wait a while to see how that goes. And so, for this first episode, I mean, what did you think of this? Because it is a bit different than what Rebels has done, at least for a little while, right?
Yeah.
Just focusing essentially on one character or on, 2 or 3 characters and their relationships between each other. And so kind of backstory and kind of Star Wars lore heavy about, what the Darksaber is and where it came from and why it's so important and all of that.
Yeah, it was... At first, because when I was watching it, at first I was like, oh man, couldn't they have just done this in a montage and like added something a little bit more meaty to it? The idea of this watching somebody train for 22 minutes. But when it kind of resolved and we kind of realized the issues that Sabine is kind of working against, because I was kind of like, she's acting very, I always, like I think I'd said before, I always thought of her as being like, maybe she's in like, the age of the character, she's actually, kind of maybe in her 30s or something like that. But I kind of felt like maybe she's not as not as old as I thought. And that there's a kind of immaturity to her deflection of this Darksaber and this kind of petulance. Where I
think Sabine is probably like, at this point in the show, she's probably like 19-ish.
Okay, see, I had nothing to base my thing on, and
I think she's only a couple of years older than Ezra.
Okay, so it's a misjudgment on my part, but yeah, it's the idea that she almost seemed to like it's, and that's actually, human or Mandalorian, if whatever you want to say. But I mean, I think it's a very real idea that somebody confronted with something that they know deep in their heart that they probably should be doing, but they have like a mental block or something like that they would kind of regress. And so kind of taking the whole thing as a whole piece, I think it was pretty good. A lot of, there was a lot of lore in it. I definitely considered myself much more, educated on Sabine as a character than I was in, say, the one she did with Wedge and Hobby, and especially more than one she did where it was like her bounty hunter friend that she kind of like, where you're just like, oh, she's like a mother to me or whatever, and then it's like, but who is she and where does she show up? And so, and we do know that eventually, for at least from the mid-season trailer, that her mother is going, this is coming home to roost, as she has to confront this issue with her family kind of, turning their back on her. So I liked that she had a lot to do here emotionally, and maybe it wasn't as action packed. I mean, I kind of, the interaction between, like, say, Kanan and Hera, that she was, I just kind of wish they were all there and they had a part of it. But then it might have been weird, this idea that, like, hey, there's like 5 other people standing around telling me I'm not doing things right. Right. So in some ways it might have seemed a little odd that she was standing there getting trained and everyone's commenting. So
yeah, I forgot to mention, right? The training happens away from Chopper Base. The planet is called Attilan, which I forgot last week, but they kind of took her further away, I guess, so that, she wouldn't be as distracted. Ezra was like, oh, it's so that, you won't hurt anyone. And originally that conversation that Kanan had with Hera, that in the kind of initial passes at the story idea, that was going to be Kanan talking to the Bendu, actually. But then they decided, no, let's make it Hera. It kind of keeps it in the family. I'm sure it also helps the budget because they don't have to pay Tom Baker for that episode. Right. But I did like the conversation between Kanan and Hera, because we don't get to see that side of that relationship as much anymore, right? We get Hera, the leader of Phoenix Squadron, but we don't get that kind of, Kanan and Hera just kind of checking in with each other and talking through stuff. We don't get that as much as I feel like, and I don't know if the show did that a lot, but that was kind of part of their relationship together as characters. And so putting that in the show, I thought that was I appreciated that they did that, and I thought that was a much better way to go than having the Bendu, because I don't know what the Bendu would be able to tell.
Yeah, it's like,
about
the return of Kanan Jarrus,
right? Like a non-force wielding character. Like, why is the Bendu relevant here? But I don't know. Yeah, it did though. After a while, Fen Rao showed up, and he was like, "Oh, great, someone else." I also forgot to mention, right? So at one point, Fen Rao shows up and he brings her these Mandalorian VAM braces, which are these armbands that have, a couple little rockets on them and a repulsor thing that she uses when she's fighting Ezra, and this electro whip that she uses a couple times and kind of gets in trouble for using. And she's like, "Oh, well, I don't have the Force, so I can use this to, fight against a Jedi." And Kanan is like, newsflash, the Jedi beat the Mandalorians in that war.
That was kind of
so these might help you from time to time, but in the long run, you're going to have to come up with something else. And so a lot of EU folks were very happy that, like, oh, the Mandalorian Jedi War is canon now. And, we mentioned Darth Revan earlier in the show, like, oh, maybe Darth Revan is going to show up somewhere. And,
right.
So that was another kind of, I don't know if you'd call it Easter egg, but that was a thing a lot of EU, or at least, Old Republic fans kind of jumped on.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like I said, I've had issues with the Mandalorian as a character and my interest in it, but I honestly think that this, it was done in a deftly and made it at least interesting. It did, like I said, at the end of the day, it did feel like it was kind of like the battle before the battle, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't feel like at the end of it, like she's like, "I'm ready and let's do it." I mean, it was just a lot of, like, she still has some ways to go in her training, and but I think it's a great, the only other thing, like I said, is that Hera, it would have been nice to have Hera there, only because I feel that Hera has a complex relationship with her family.
Mm-hmm.
And since Sabine obviously they would be able to speak on that. Now, that's not to say that we aren't going to come across this in another episode, and they'll have this conversation where they can kind of commiserate or inform each other, because in a lot of respects, the interaction between Hera and Kanan was pretty cool too. It's kind of like, it's almost like it's kind of like that. It's like a couple kind of working out raising of a child, when it's like, we're going to go, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to confer with my partner, and we're going to I'm going to tell you how all things that's ticking me off. And then like any good partnership, they say, "Hey, would you ever think of it this way?" And he's like, "You're right." And then, so I guess it did build the family, this conceit of family. And it's like where, I think people who watch the show can hunger for it a lot, because they do tend to partition these people out and go, "Oh, we have all these great characters. Let's just take 2 of them and send them off to a planet. Let's just have, let's take Zeb and have him only interact with like droids or something." And you're just like,
and so once I found out, it was in the show notes, or the whatever it's called on StarWars.com, right? Once I read that Warhead was the B story, initially I was like, "Oh, that's why it's just Zeb and the droids," because that was initially the B story for this other thing. It was like, okay, that makes sense now. Why in the other episode everyone else is just like, "Oh, we're leaving Zeb, goodbye." It's like because they had to come up with something to explain why. This was just its own episode now.
Yeah, it's too bad that there's probably I wonder if there's anybody out there with the technology to kind of do an edit where they could just edit those as like one episode. I don't know how you'd really do that though. I don't think it makes sense, but
yeah,
but it would be, I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but yeah, and in that conversation with Hera and Kanan, I think there was an interesting. She kind of alluded to, hey, remember, when Hera first joined us, or excuse me, when Sabine first joined us, you kind of remember what she was like, and how we had to, kind of manage her, so that's kind of interesting too. And it's like, we never really got the story of when she joined the rebellion. I guess I said she left the Empire and joined the rebellion earlier when I was describing it, but yeah, if I completely forgotten about that bounty hunter friend of hers, because why would I remember it?
Yeah, it wasn't a good episode.
Right? It's like, so what was, right, how long was she with that bounty hunter after she left the Empire, before she met up with Hera and Kanan and decided to go with them? And how did that happen? And what was she like when that first happened? So yeah, just hearing, allusions to that, and, it does give kind of the story more dimension, and it kind of fleshes out these characters a little bit, even if, that character's not on screen. Just the way that other characters talk about them is like, oh, well, you remember what she was like when she joined up. It's like, oh, okay. So then, right, that adds to that character arc. And honestly, I mean, it's like, God, what took them so long to do a Sabine episode like this, right?
Yeah.
I feel like, and in Rebels Recon, they talked to Tia Sarkar, who does the voice of Sabine, and she was like, oh, this is my favorite episode yet. And I'm like, yeah, I'll bet it is, because you actually have more than 2 lines of dialogue. Like, it's not even that it's a Sabine-centric episode. It's like they actually gave you anything to do. So it's like, yeah, they need to like start giving that character more to do in the context of everything else, and not just like give her a line in one episode, 2 lines in the next episode, 1 line in the next episode, 3 lines, and then 2 lines, and then suddenly she gets her own episode. It's like, no, weave her into the show a little more, because she can add these other things that you're not doing.
Well, it also makes me wonder, though, if narratively, now that she's kind of like, well, she's got the Darksaber, she's rising for her boon, I guess, is that what they call it? Like her birthright, and eventually that is going to culminate with her returning to Mandalore and trying to. Well, does that mean that, like, when all is said and done, she's going to stay on Mandalore, and this is going to be the end of her as part of the crew, or are they going to come up with an interesting way to, like, well, I fixed everything on Mandalore, but I'm still going to, sit in a bunk on the Ghost and spray paint stuff. It's like, it's the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, just when we finally starting to really, find out what this woman's story is, it's like, yeah, I'm starting to wonder if maybe this means not that she's going to die, but that she's going to actually end up getting sidelined by not being part of the crew anymore at the end of this story.
Yeah, I mean, so I was thinking about this too, and there's maybe a parallel with the show Dark Matter, which I've mentioned a couple times. It's a very good show; people should watch it. But so just real quick, the premise of Dark Matter is that these 6 people wake up on a ship. They have no memories of who they are or how they got there, and so they just initially refer to each other like in the order in which they woke up from their hibernation or whatever. So 1 through 6. And then over the course of the show, they learn more about who they used to be in their lives and everything. And so it turns out one of these characters comes from this ruling family on a planet. And so over the course of a couple seasons, he kind of plots how to get back and, assume the throne, because he was kind of chased out of his planet for various reasons. And so then at the end of, I guess I'll spoil this, but at the end of season 3, at some point in season 3, I guess that happens. No, I'm sorry, season 2. There have only been 2 seasons, but at some point in season 2 that happens, and this one character kind of leaves the group, and he's like, no, I'm the ruler of this other planet now. And he's still in the show. He still shows up because he's still relevant to the plot, the kind of big overall story arc, but he's probably not going to be in every episode from now on the way he was before. And so I wonder if they will get to a point with Sabine where they do that, where, yeah, she kind of maybe unites Clan Vizsla at a certain point, or maybe she doesn't. We'll see. But, she brings more Mandalorians with her into the rebellion. And so, sometimes Hera will call on her, and we'll see Sabine and her group of Mandalorians kind of contribute, and then other times they'll be off doing their own thing, and while Kanan is training Ezra, right? And invariably that happens on a show like this, where the characters kind of split off, and as they develop further, they get their own storylines and they get their own kind of pieces of the show, and so it doesn't feel quite as unified anymore. But I do feel like we're getting to that point faster than I would have expected, given how much time they've spent or haven't spent developing Sabine. It's like,
right.
Oh, okay, we're already at that point where she's like going back to Mandalorian, and you're right, she hasn't fully finished her training, so maybe it doesn't happen this time, and maybe it doesn't work, and she has to go back to Phoenix Squadron and to the Ghost Crew and try to strategize about how to try again. But I think they are going to get to the point where it's, we know that Hera and Chopper show up on Yavin 4 in Rogue One. We don't know about the others, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're dead. In Sabine's case, she could be on Mandalore, right? And maybe there are things going on Mandalore that are relevant to other stories that are coming out that we just don't know about yet. And maybe Sabine will be a part of those. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it, because it's like when you get real development on this show, you got to really grab a hold of it, because and encourage them to do it, because I don't know about television production, and I definitely don't know about this show, and it just makes me wonder if there's this eternal war between, hey, this is Disney XD, we're trying to appeal to 7-year-olds, and then
right.
But you're also making a show where you're actively telling people, say, in whatever age you are, why don't you come check out this whole aspect of Star Wars on television that you might not initially. That's like, I still don't understand why Rebels isn't on Netflix. It just doesn't make sense to me, but maybe it's like there's a 5-year limit and before they put stuff on Netflix. But it's like, to me, it's like, it'd be much easier, because I'm not really going to buy the Blu-rays, but then occasionally I'd love to rewatch them, but I have to watch them as Disney XD logins on my mom's cable company, and every time I go into that app I have to re-put my data in, and so I rarely go back and watch them past the show. But yeah, I'm looking forward to. So you say it's going to be off for 3 weeks now?
It's at least, I think because Rebels Recon, they're like, oh, we'll be gone for a couple of weeks, and then when they showed the clip from the next episode, it was like February something.
Oh, so we're not going to go. So they're not jumping it. We're not going to hear this. We're not going to find out this Obi-Wan stuff until later in the season, I assume, huh?
Yeah. So the next episode is going to air on February 18th.
Oh, wow. We might have run through all the comics and all the TV shows, and we'll have nothing to talk about next week.
Yeah.
Oh, well. I guess
we'll talk about Star Wars 26 and 27 at least.
Yes. And then, trust me, we'll have something to talk about. But I guess that's probably a good place to wrap up. We have covered a lot today, and you probably can't wait to tell us what you think about it. And the best way to do that is email us at hosts. That's host with an S at talkingbirdcast.com. We are on Twitter at talkingbirdcast.com. I think we're on Instagram, but I don't put anything up there very often at Talking Birdcast. You're already listening to us, so you probably know we're available on iTunes. We're on Stitcher. I think I thought we were on the Google Play Store, but now I'm starting to wonder, because I'm not getting any downloads from that. I must have done something wrong. It doesn't matter. You're hearing us. We have a website, www.talkingbirdcast.com. We have an Amazon affiliate link, which we appreciate. It helps us out a lot. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. And that's all you do. It takes you right to Amazon. What happens is a portion of your purchase, qualifying purchase or whatever, kicks back to your favorite Star Wars podcast. Doesn't cost you anything extra. I think that's about it. You got anything to add?
No. Thanks for listening again. I guess we'll, depending on how much content there is next week, we'll talk to you soon or less soon.
Less soon or never. I'm done with this show.
Yeah.
Anyway, for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.
A martial arts champion in search of the glow.
Master, I need more time.
I am no longer your master.
A rock and roll star on the rise.
I know what it's like to lose precious things.
A madman.
Shogun of Harlem.
A maniac.
You're gonna put my video on your show, aren't you?
The answer is no.
And the glamour, the power, and the sound of Motown.
I don't want you to kill anybody.
Are you out of your mind?
The Leroy Green I'm looking for is a little punk who thinks he's a kung fu master.
I am no master.
You sure look like a master to me.
This is Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon. It's about the power of the glow. Timok, Vanity. Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon, directed by Michael Schultz, a Motown Productions picture from TriStar.